Fresh Arts International presents Fresh Talk, conversations about creativity in the 21st century. I'm Kathy Bird, Fresh Art producer. This episode of Fresh Talk features conversations with 5 current participants in the Roswell Artist-in-Residence Program. Established in 1967 by artist and art collector Don Anderson, the program offers visual artists the unique opportunity to spend a year concentrating on their work. The voices you'll hear are those of Sarah Bostwick, Jon-Paul Villegas, Brian Kluge, Corwin Levi, and Siobhan McBride. I'm sitting outdoors in a gorgeous space in New Mexico at Roswell Artist-in-Residence Program. I'm surrounded by artists, and my question for them is, what is the difference of making art in Roswell, New Mexico, or in this space than making it anywhere else you could be making art in the world? Sarah?
I was just taken with the feeling that you don't have the same sort of strings attached or the same pressures. Literally, no one is watching what you do. I don't know, I just feel the freedom to experiment, finally. Because you have more time. Normally, it's just like you have to get something done because you have to work so much and make your art, so like you just have extra time to fool around and discover things.
I don't think prior to coming here I made anything that was vaguely earth tone. That's an interesting thing that I found out about myself, is that I'm capable of working with things that are brown and beige. I think where I came from, which was Southern California, I grew up using like a really unnatural palette, a lot of pastels and things, and then it's interesting because for me it made me think about how I am like pretty directly affected by my immediate environment. And in New York, I think it was the first time that I had been working in a place that was super dirty and full of grit and dust. I mean, literally. So my studio was full of this kind of black soot, and my work became sort of a lot of black and gray, and then coming to Roswell, I'm making all these things that are made out of clay and dust, and I mean there's still some of the similar things that I used in Los Angeles. I mean I still work with a lot of stuff that I get from thrift stores and things, but it's all kind of mixed together with things that are just sort of much more traditional and kind of romantic in a way that I never would have allowed myself to do in Los Angeles or New York. I actually feel like I've become part of this sort of weird romantic tradition of the landscape, and which is really funny if you see my work, because it's not at all romantic in that way. It's funny the way that stuff is kind of filtered in. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, I guess as someone who was already using earth tones, that's not so much a part of what's new for me. The thing that maybe struck me the most actually was the level of support in the community for the arts, and particularly for clay. I wasn't expecting to find that. I was expecting more to be off on my own, and you certainly can be if you so choose. It's been refreshing actually in a town of 40,000 that there's 2 museums. I mean, that's pretty incredible.
Not having a day job gives you tons more time to like hang out with your partner and watch movies and read books and watch the bird feeders. It's the different kind of creative acoustics you get to feed on things that you wouldn't in your regular day-to-day life. And also, like Sarah was saying, you have an opportunity to take risks in a way that you don't feel safe to in your day-to-day life as well. What would you say, Corwin?
I guess 2 things. First is not so much the daytime landscape out here, but the nighttime landscape. I've been in areas with less light pollution, but I've never seen somewhere where you can just look from horizon to horizon and see so many stars. It's a little crazy.
Yeah, the skies are so big.
Right? And also, what you were talking about, Sarah, after about 4 or 5 months, it just hits you that this residency is different from any other residency. Like you go to, any number of residencies and you work, you do your thing. But then suddenly, after your show, after 6 months, you're like, wow, I can just do anything. And I still have 6 months to do it.
It's so awesome.
And it's a pretty wonderful feeling.
And it's also scary, too, because you have to face yourself. And
You do. And you actually have to, go ahead.
It's the horror, really, right?
You also have
The
to really
Joseph
think
Conrad
about
moment.
what that means to have a partner, and you have to really think very explicitly about like what amounts of time you designate for things, because it's not structured in that way. So being an artist can involve just spending 23 hours a day making art.
The family time is huge, though. I have a
Right.
1-year-old daughter. Having been here for the last 6 months with her, it's just been amazing. I can't picture any other kind of scenario where I would have had this much time to devote to her and to my wife as well. But yeah, that's priceless and irreplaceable, really.
Making a commitment for a year, though, that's a significant demand on an individual in the 21st century to actually give yourself that much time to be able to afford it in a way in terms of your career. You have to keep up with the outside world even though you're in this wonderful desert bubble.
Yeah.
That was an issue for us. JP wasn't sure if he wanted to come because he was at a point where he was supposed to be talking to everyone. He was right in the middle of it,
Yeah, and I felt like I was getting more. I mean, New York is kind of a bit of a tough market to break, and to get to a point where you sort of feel like, oh, you can go to an opening and know people and not feel like an outsider. Like, I feel like I was just getting to that point.
I had a different need. Like, I was working so much I didn't have time to make enough work. And I needed to come here to make a body of work so I could go back with something, because I didn't have the work to show there, I just make bits and pieces. And, like, you had this body of work you needed to get people in there to see. So.
And then we found out about the residency, and I was like, oh, I'm going to have like 2 months to do that, or we'll just have to go and make a bunch of work here, which I'm glad we did, actually.
We'll just have our stuff together. I mean, you make all the work, but you have time to do all the business side, too. Yeah. And, like, we came together as a group and, like, put together these packets. It's, like, all, like, a practice. I mean, we're going to apply to things together, but it's also just, like, getting into the practice of actually doing that. Whereas you never force yourself to do it because you're always under so much pressure from all these different points. It's actually interesting to be at a residency where we're all artists. I only went to one other residency, and it was mostly writers, actually. And there was a lot more people because it was shorter time. So I didn't go to grad school, so I feel like this is sort of my grad school, like being with a really strong community and having a time and have the facilities.
Well, and committing to a year also allows you to be more ambitious with what projects you can take on. That's a beautiful thing.
And also part of it is just taking all your stuff with you.
Yeah.
Like to a month residency, you just take a project's worth of stuff.
Right.
And here you have your whole studio.
Yep.
Or a studio that's twice as big as you ever had.
Right.
Or ever will.
Yeah.
Right.
What do you think are the downsides of this residency?
Moving out.
Yeah.
Not getting paid anymore.
Having
Yeah, I
at
know.
the end of
Not
the
getting
year.
paid.
Yeah, I mean, there are some weird things that they're not so bad that it actually makes it a negative. But, like, there's intense
You
weather
adjust
and
to those.
intense bugs that are not to the point that you can't handle it, but it was something new,
The weather, though, is also fascinating, right?
Yeah.
The sky turning brown from a sandstorm. That's really...
The next morning, I spoke with Sarah Bostwick about how the residency had affected her creative practice. I'm sitting here with Sarah Bostwick, who is a relief sculptor working out of New York City normally, who's shown her work in Brussels, San Francisco, Providence, Rhode Island, and Ridgefield, Connecticut, and finds herself here taking a year off real life to be an artist in residence, far from the art scene that she's used to. And this past week, she opened a new exhibition at the Roswell Art Center. Sarah's work is referencing architecture. It's a minimalist sculptural form that's often cast and recently made of wood. Sarah, I'm wondering why architecture is a reference point for your work.
Well, I'm interested in the language of objects and what the objects that we create tell us about ourselves and how we communicate with each other through these visual language. And it has to do with my upbringing. My father's an architect. We always built things together.
Why relief versus some other form? What is exciting to you about the relief of an object instead of the object itself?
Well, I like its dual connection with the historical tradition of carving and casting and these really formal materials, and then how I sort of see like a more high-tech thing where it actually changes throughout the day, but it doesn't physically change, but when the light hits it in different ways, it's almost like the picture moves or it changes meaning depending on where the light is hitting it. So that just fascinates me, that you can create this thing that's almost alive, very slowly moving, but it's so low-tech, you know. So all the work that's in the exhibition now has to do with photography and sort of how we see the world through photography. So sort of the affectations of the lens, but we're so used to it that it almost feels like our own sight, you know? And so like what happens when you're viewing through that filter of the photograph. And so a lot of the pieces capture light the way a photograph would capture light, but you don't actually see that in real life, or you don't notice it as much, I guess. What I'm looking for is work that you can look at over and over again, because it's going to be different every time you see it, because the sun's going to hit it differently.
And those pictures up to now have been quite intimate, the scale, until the most recent work, which is growing.
Yeah, well, look at where we are. Look at this room.
Yes, the size of space you have to work in here versus New York is significantly different.
Yeah, I was working out of my house before I left. Because of the light, I couldn't afford a space with the light that I wanted, whereas my house had amazing light, so I definitely worked smaller. And I didn't have the tools to do it. I really want to come away with a much larger body of work, and I think it's definitely going to be a stepping off point, you know, after leaving here. But hopefully.
Now my dear grandfather and his father before him lived in a shack in a switchyard. So I'll take the next train where the next train takes me, screaming. So I'll take the next train where the...
You've been listening to Fresh Talk with artists in residence in Roswell, New Mexico. Read more about these artists and hear other podcasts in this series on FreshArtInternational.com.